Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another video. Recently on September 30th, 2024, Amplifica disclosed the results of their first in-human clinical trial of AMP303, an innovative treatment for androgenetic alopecia. The study, which focused on the safety, tolerability, and efficacy of an intradermal injectable solution of the treatment AMP303 versus placebo, shows a significant milestone in the treatment of perhaps not just androgenetic alopecia treatment, but also potentially scarring alopecia. So it could be for a wide range of hair loss conditions. So this is really exciting. So before I get into the results of the study and/or press release, let's review what AMP303 is and how it works and how its potential efficacy could reverse hair loss by generating new hair follicles and stimulating current hair follicles to become stronger and produce more hairs. So what is AMP303? AMP303 is a proprietary derivative of osteopontin developed by Amplifica with potential implications for promoting hair growth and hair follicle regeneration. Osteopontin is a multifunctional extracellular matrix protein that plays a critical role in various biological processes, including bone health, immune regulation, and cellular signaling. So, as a derivative, AMP303 likely retains structural similarities to the osteopontin molecule, enabling it to mimic or enhance certain biological functions of its parent molecule. So we can get an understanding of what the molecule does by looking at one of the lead researchers and co-founders at Amplifica, being Maxim Plikus, whose research went into finding this particular molecule, this protein, this peptide. And this paper would be, quote, "Signaling by senescent melanocytes hyperactivates hair growth," unquote, by the said Dr. Maxim Plikus and colleagues, and they observed that osteopontin plays a role in signaling pathways that affect hair growth. The mechanism described involves the interactions of osteopontin with its receptor CD44, which is known to be involved in cell signaling and tissue regeneration. Osteopontin is widely found in the body, including in the bone tissue, where it contributes to bone remodeling and health. It also acts as a cytokine that can influence bone metabolism by affecting osteoclasts. And these are cells that are responsible for bone resorption. And bone resorption is the destruction of bone tissue, and it promotes bone loss. So here, it's actually important for this to be done because it helps break down old bone, and it can release minerals at times like calcium into the bloodstream when there's a low level of calcium. So all in all, it's a pretty important process for maintaining homeostasis. And osteopontin is also important for osteoblasts, and these are cells responsible for bone formation, so making, obviously, new bone. So it's a key regulator of bone health, is what I'm trying to say, and you can obviously tell from the name itself, osteopontin. The CD44 receptor to which osteopontin binds is overexpressed in various tissues, particularly in areas where cell-to-cell interactions and matrix binding are crucial. On hair cycle behavior, the CD44 receptor is also found in the hair follicle, which suggests a potential role in hair growth and regulation, and possibly in hair follicle stem cell functions. So manipulating the signaling pathways involving osteopontin could enhance hair regeneration and even lead to the creation of new hair follicles. So how did they come to this determination? Well, a key aspect of this research involved the discovery that osteopontin, along with another molecule known as S3 or SCUB3, are overexpressed in certain regions of the skin. And this would be the hairy nevi, which is a hairy mole. So hairy nevi, hairy moles, just know that those two are the same. And these moles gave way, when further research was conducted, to finding out that osteopontin and SCUB3 had important roles in contributing to hair growth from those moles. So interestingly, this hair growth is associated with the presence of what is known as senescent cells. Senescent cells are cells that have stopped dividing due to aging or some sort of damage. While these cells no longer function in their original capacity, they remain metabolically active and secrete various signaling molecules that influence nearby cells. This secretion can be harmful, contributing to inflammation and tissue degradation in some contexts, but as Plikus's research demonstrated, senescent cells can also have regenerative effects under specific circumstances. In this case, senescent dermal fibroblasts, which are cells within the skin that have entered senescence, were found to secrete osteopontin. Despite their status as non-dividing cells, these fibroblasts release osteopontin and SCOOP3 as sort of secretions, and they activate nearby hair follicle stem cells. So it's between these sort of interactions between senescent cells and stem cells is what seems to drive the increased hair growth seen in regions like hairy moles. So applying this finding, Amplifica and colleagues saw that maybe this sort of pathway could be manipulated in hair follicles in other parts of the body, like the scalp. And they confirmed this with their animal models, their ex vivo experiments using hair follicles from humans to come to this particular determination. The rodent experiments particularly involved genetically modifying mice to either overexpress or inhibit osteopontin in their skin. When osteopontin was overexpressed, hair growth from hair follicles entered in the growth phase more rapidly, leading to increased hair density and faster hair regeneration. And on the other hand, when osteopontin or its CD44 receptor was inhibited, the hair growth slowed down and follicles stayed at a resting state, also known as the telogen phase, for longer periods of time. So this highlighted that at least in the animal model, the crucial role of osteopontin and the CD44 receptor in hair growth regulation. And it's through these experiments the researchers identified osteopontin as a potential therapeutic in treating hair loss conditions. And who knows, maybe they can develop a CD44 agonist. And remember, if this is the first time you're watching any of these sorts of videos, an agonist essentially makes a receptor act more in the role that it's supposed to carry out. So it overexpresses the values that encodes in that specific receptor and cell interaction, if that makes any sense. So I talked about this on the channel before, the PPAR or the PPAR gamma receptor, and how it's involved with lipid metabolization. And when this receptor is downregulated, or when it is antagonized, lipids begin to build up because the receptor isn't working properly anymore to signal the nearby cells to properly work and metabolize those lipids. But when it's agonized, when there's an agonist, it helps make that PPAR gamma receptor actually overwork or work again in defected areas of the body. So, like I said, maybe there could be more developments for CD44 receptor agonists that could have implications for hair growth. So, going back again to the AMP303 molecule that Amplifica discovered, how is it theorized to work? So, again, by virtue of being a derivative of osteopontin, it is theorized to interact with the CD44 receptor similarly to its parent molecule, but possibly with enhanced specificity or efficacy, right? So the interactions between AMP303 and CD44 on the hair follicle cells could activate the same pathways that we saw in just straight up osteopontin injections. And you're probably asking, okay, so why don't Amplifica just use osteopontin, right? Well, they can't patent osteopontin, and it's likely that with their proprietary AMP303 that is derivative of osteopontin, it could be more active in the hair follicles, it could be more targeted, but also, let's be real, now they have ownership of that particular protein, signaling protein, peptide, whatever you want to call it, so they can deliver it to the market and they have the rights to produce it. So yeah, it's really supposed to be a better version of osteopontin. And at least as of now, it's very intradermal injection based. So there's more focus on the localized effects in the hair follicles where this particular AMP303 is being studied. So on the scalp. So is this the cure for hair loss? It could very well be a cure. Yes, and I'm confident enough to say that. Or maybe a very effective treatment in lines of minoxidil that pretty much everyone responds to. And this is what is exciting if all goes well, right? And this also makes the recent phase 1 human study of AMP303, the osteopontin derivative made by Amplifica and Dr. Max Amplific's research, very exciting. So let's have a quick look at this press report and, I guess, study. So this is phase 1 of Amplifica's AMP303 human study clinical trial. It used a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled multi-center design recognized as the gold standard in clinical research for its ability to limit bias and ensure high-quality data collection. The population study consisted of male participants aged 18 to 45 diagnosed with androgenetic alopecia. One thing that I liked about this study was the unique crossover design, where each participant received both the experimental treatment and a placebo acting as his own control. Specifically, AMP303 was injected once, that's right, just once, into one side of the frontal temporal region of the scalp, where what is essentially a saline solution serving as the placebo was injected on the opposite side of the head. So here, you're getting more data per person, and it's actually controlling for individual differences because, like I said before, each subject focuses as their own placebo and their own control. So you can assess subjects by themselves, so how one side of any subject responds to the other side, so how the AMP303 treatment side is compared to the placebo side, but also you can compare subjects to each other. So this just gives a wealth of information, and like I said, I really like this sort of design. Additionally, participants were stratified into two groups based on the duration of their hair loss, either recent, being 3 to 5 years, or long-standing, over 10 years. And this stratification enabled a more nuanced analysis of AMP303's effectiveness across different stages of androgenetic alopecia, because we know that with conventional treatments like finasteride, dutasteride, and even minoxidil, the longer you go without treatment, the limited recovery you can make. And we can look at studies like the 10-year Italian finasteride study by Rossi et al., as well as the 10-year Japanese finasteride study by Yanagisawa et al. So what were the key findings here? Well, when it comes to the safety profile, AMP303 was seemingly well tolerated, with most adverse events being mild and no severe adverse events reported. In regards to its efficacy, there was a statistically significant increase in non-vellus hair count, with subjects showing over a 15% improvement at 60 days into the trial, and over a 10% improvement at 150 days post-treatment compared to placebo. So after just one injection in a 6-month trial, and this is what's very exciting, it seems that AMP303 generated these results. If these results are reliable, perhaps 1 or 2 injections per year would be enough to keep hair growth continuous. And I covered this in a video that I made before regarding how Scoop 3 or osteopontin could be used when it gets to the market. And I essentially went over what Maxim Plikus, the chief scientific lead, the chief, I think, science lead at Amplifica, as well as a co-founder at Amplifica, he essentially kind of said that in an article, that maybe in the future it'll be possibly 1 injection a year or twice a year, and that would be enough to keep hair growth continuous. And the results indicated not only an increase in hair density and thickness over time, but also an encouraging potential for converting vellus hairs into non-vellus hairs, suggesting that a reversal of hair loss is very possible. Now, the report unfortunately did not include any pictures of the patients, which I do think, this isn't anything odd or whatever. A lot of pharmaceutical companies today, they don't put out the photos of these patients just straight up. They'd possibly do that in a future sort of paper, but in their press release, rarely do they put out photos. So this isn't just an Amplifica thing. It seems to be a standard practice as of now. But nor do we have any details about how many participants are in the trial. And I thought this was kind of odd. Personally, I find these two parts a bit worrying, if I have to be honest, because, and I'll just say especially, the number of the participants, right, in the trial is very important to the reliability and generalizability of the trial data. So in other words, we need to know the sample size when it comes to this, right? Because if they only had 4 people, then let's be real, that's not enough to suggest anything, right? But if they had 20 people, okay, that's not a lot of subjects, not a lot of participants, but you can still get some sort of a study going on there. But if they had about 50 people or 100, that's very important, right? So not having the sample size number is kind of a bit of a downer here for me. Also, another aspect, and this isn't just to come at Amplifica, but I really wish more pharmaceutical companies studying hair loss did this as well. We don't know if there was a biopsy done that shows the hair follicle size changes within the areas in which AMP303 was injected. It would be nice to know if there were changes to vellus hair color when it supposedly, in accordance to Amplifica's press report, transformed into non-vellus hairs. Perhaps they became more pigmented and intermediate in size. Not only that, but we do know from the studies of Sinclair, Dr. Sinclair, that is, that when it comes to long-term androgenetic alopecia that goes without treatment, so essentially end-stage androgenetic alopecia, there's this thing called the erector pili muscle, and it's a muscle in the hair follicle that connects the hair follicle to the stem cell bulge. And when this sort of muscle is severed, it is seen through research that the hair loss is irreversible. Now, it could be the case that AMP303, and if they did biopsy data, it would be nice to see this, but something tells me they didn't do it. But it could be the case that AMP303, if it is to reverse vellus hairs into intermediate hairs, it could potentially heal that sort of severing of the erector pili muscle. Maybe it's reestablishing that erector pili muscle. Or maybe in the hair follicles that it regenerates, right, making new hair follicles as opposed to stimulating dormant ones, it could create new tissue structures like the erector pili muscle and sebaceous glands. So it's very, very interesting, and I would love to have seen some sort of biopsy data. And again, I love this study's design due to its controlled within-subject comparison and stratification by hair loss duration, which collectively enhance the integrity and applicability of the findings. So in other words, we have the ability to compare patients to each other as well as to themselves by observing different parts of the scalp. In an interview that I did with Dr. William Rassman, a co-founder and chief medical officer of Amplifica, he highlighted the scientific basis behind AMP303. He credited the foundational work of Dr. Maxim Plikis, another co-founder and chief scientific officer, whose research into compounds like osteopontin and its derivatives, including AMP303, has opened new avenues for hair regeneration in bald areas. And Dr. Rassman also mentioned other promising compounds in Amplifica's pipeline, such as AMP601, which is derived from SCOOP3. Amplifica has several compounds in their pipeline that are each potentially primed for human clinical trials, which also could have excellent results in their own right. So what I'm trying to say here is, even if AMP303 isn't the most effective of these compounds, it could be a very effective compound in and of itself. Perhaps AMP601 or other sort of osteopontin and SCOOP3 derivatives within Amplifica's pipeline could have better results. It's all about a matter of putting this through clinical trials, and Dr. Rassman expressed in the interview that Amplifica is a startup, right? And there's only so much that they can do. So essentially, a bigger pharmaceutical company needs to come along and partner with Amplifica to kind of push these sort of pipelines along through the clinical trial process. But although I am very optimistic, I do need to bring up some concerns here. And this actually involves the safety concerns and potential risks associated with stimulation of senescent cells through the activation of the CD44 receptor, particularly in the context of long-term treatment. Senescent cells, while playing a role in tissue regeneration, are also implicated in various pathological conditions, including tumor growth and, sadly, cancer. The CD44 receptor, which binds to the osteopontin, has been identified in many types of tumors, including breast, prostate, and lung cancer. This receptor is involved in cell adhesion, migration, and even metastasis, meaning its persistent activation could inadvertently fuel harmful processes of cancer spread and growth if not carefully controlled. So we know from the recent AMP303 study, which demonstrated promising results for hair growth through osteopontin stimulation and CD44 receptor interactions, right? It worked, but we clearly see that this thing is very potent. Just one injection was able to have these sort of beneficial results. However, if it is potentially encouraging the growth of senescent cells, or it's playing in that sort of, biological pathway, maybe with long-term exposure, this thing could be potentially genotoxic. We don't know yet, but it could be potentially genotoxic. So although they haven't found any sort of adverse events or interactions, it's only been 6 months, right? And we don't know if this is a one-time injection thing or if it's something you have to get injected twice every year, just repeatedly if you want to have hair growth. And I think that's what worries me here, right? Because in cancer biology, osteopontin is often overexpressed in aggressive cancers, where it promotes cancer cell survival and growth and invasion into surrounding tissues. Its role in facilitating this sort of communication between cancer cells and their microenvironment makes it a marker of poor prognosis in many cancers. So we do have to be careful when using this sort of pathway. And again, like I said before, this poses a concern that stimulating this sort of osteopontin CD44 pathway could encourage hair to grow, but it could have unintended consequences in other tissues, especially if people already have sort of abnormal growths or precancerous cells present. So it could make something that is already benign into something harmful. It could make something that is senescent, like a mole, into something that becomes cancerous. So we have to be very, very careful here. As an aside, a study by Zhang and colleagues provides an important insight into the risks of affecting the CD44 receptor. This study found that CD44, particularly a part called the intracellular domain, plays a role in aging by reducing a process called autophagy in the cells lining blood vessels. So I'm sure many people have heard of autophagy when it comes to things like intermittent fasting, where apparently when you fast, your body is able to get rid of old, dead cells or cells that are kind of not acting right. So it's your body's natural process of cleaning up and recycling damaged parts of the body. So when CD44 interferes with this process, it can cause cells to age prematurely or in a way that is potentially dangerous. And we can already see here in a cancerous context, this is especially concerning because cancer cells often use the CD44 receptor to their advantage. So by shutting down autophagy, CD44 helps cancer cells survive in very harsh conditions where in normal contexts, they would be starved and destroyed. So there could be a condition, a harsh condition, like when they don't have enough nutrients or oxygen, which is common in tumors. By using the CD44 to its advantage, it can shut down autophagy and kind of thug it out and survive in other parts of the body where it shouldn't really be. So the cancer starts to spread rapidly in some conditions. Furthermore, in a review by Zhao et al. Called, quote, "The Role of Osteopontin in the Progression of Solid Organ Tumors," unquote, it shows the role of osteopontin in this particular cancer spread and development. While osteopontin is involved in normal body processes like bone health and immune function, it also helps cancer cells survive and grow in their own right. So we, again, have to be careful, right? Osteopontin has been linked to cancer cells resistance in treatments like chemotherapy. So we have cancers like pancreatic and breast cancers where osteopontin helps cancer cells survive and become very immunoresistant and resilient to treatments. And in fact, in this review, and I'll put it in the description below, it suggests that blocking osteopontin could be a potential cancer therapy as it may reduce tumor growth and make cancer cells more vulnerable to treatment. So I have a strong conviction that osteopontin most likely is a great hair growth stimulant on its own, and likely AMP303 or AMP601 will also stimulate hair growth. However, we need to be very careful here, right? The more I look into this, the more concerned I become. Listen, I have no doubt, I actually do believe, just from the research that I've done, that osteopontin, this CD44 pathway, will indeed stimulate and grow hair. But when it comes to safety, I'm not too convinced. I'm more convinced about its efficacy, but safety, not so much, right? The reality is we need to study AMP303 under long-term settings. And that sort of long-term study could be half the duration of its patent life, I'm going to be honest, to see if there's any sort of cancer, encouragement or development that happens significantly with people that use this sort of osteopontin-based therapy. And maybe it has nothing to do particularly with osteopontin itself, right? There are some cancers, the same cancer in some person can have a different pathway in another person with that same cancer, right? So two people can have lung cancer, but they could have radically different pathways that cause them to get lung cancer. So I'm not necessarily saying that it's 100% established in literature that CD44 pathway, osteopontin, whatever, is completely 100% involved in all cancers, and it will cause cancer, and it is genotoxic, but we already know that it is related to senescent cells, and it does kind of carry that sort of related risk. So we got to be realistic. We know that, particularly in this context, it's only been studied within 6 months. That's relatively short term when it comes to things like potential cancer growth, right? So we need long-term studies, and I'm very encouraged here that, maybe Amplifica can partner up with a bigger pharmaceutical company to do more complex studying when it comes to this. So that being said, I'm very excited about Amplifica's, hair growth stimulants that they're researching. And I do believe that it will come up with something that is very viable, but safety is something that is in my concern in this particular case. So sorry for the long video. I've been trying to take my time in releasing this, trying to, just read over some papers and stuff like that. But yeah, that's my thoughts when it comes to this particular topic. And I want to thank you guys for watching this video to the end. As always, I will have timestamps, but yeah, if you got this far into the video, comment in the comment section below. Green hair. Yes, the color green, Green, hair, like the hair on your head. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.